Well, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time it is, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us. It's Peikoff Wednesday. It's time for Keeping It Real, except it's the 50th episode. We have done, James Valliant, 50 episodes just based on keeping it real, an extension of the original Peikoff lecture series. That's outstanding.
Yeah,
James,
I have
how
to
are you
say
doing on this fine
congratulations
morning
to
while
both
I
of us,
mute
Robert.
my device here? There we
Uh,
go.
Congratulations to both of us, and special thanks to, of course, the founder of our feast, Dr. Leonard Peikoff, my mentor, hero, and teacher. And so we decided we'd do a very, very special episode of Leonard Peikoff Wednesday, our 50th episode of Keeping It Real. And so we'll have other guests. We figure, people probably, I don't know if we reach the fatigue zone with you and me, but it sure will help to bring in some new blood and get some new ideas here, because Dr. Peikoff, I have met literally hundreds of people who've told me that we're all used to people saying Ayn Rand changed my life, and I've met thousands upon thousands of people who've said Ayn Rand changed my life. But literally, I have met hundreds and hundreds of other people who've said that Leonard Peikoff changed their life and that he made the crucial difference in their understanding of objectivism. And that certainly applies to me. I had read Ayn Rand's novels. I'd read a good deal of Ayn Rand long before I started studying from him, but it was Dr. Leonard Peikoff who turned me into a serious student of objectivism and cleared the mythology and dust and BS that others had put in my head, and finally got me on track for becoming a serious student of objectivism. So with my testimonial out of the way, we do have already with us some amazing guests. Where shall we start, gentlemen?
And more to come before we're done. Now, real quick, before we introduce anybody, I want to say thank you to the folks who are in the chat. In fact, Michael Sweet has already started us off with a super chat. Thank you for that. Any chat comments where you hit the $, put a couple of dollars on it, a few pounds, a few pence, whatever it is, support the Ayn Rand Center UK. And I've got to say, this whole series, including the preceding series, which we'll talk about as well, the Peikoff Lectures series, entirely made possible by the existence of this channel. So by all means, put in those super chats, make your comments and your questions stand out, because you deserve that as well. And James, I want to jump right to our first. We've got more folks coming in. We've got great people on the screen, but trust me, we've got even more coming. I want to start with the man behind Quent Cordair Fine Art. Quentin Linda Cordair, of course, great friends of the Ayn Rand Center UK. They've sponsored one of the episodes of TDO, The Daily Objective, recently. But also, as the COVID pandemic wound down and we reflected on that, we had a chance to discuss the heroic, downright, I know we say heroes. Some people feel the phrase is exaggerated. No, this was heroic. Quent Cordair Fine Art refused to remain locked down past the point in which it was obviously irrational, oppressive, made no sense. And Quentin Linda Cordair, thank you for joining us. You are heroes this morning, and we honor you for that, but we also want to hear, what has Leonard Peikoff done for you? What has he meant for you? What's been his impact in your lives?
Hi, Robert. Hi, James and Kirk and Daniel, I believe so far. Thank you so much for having us on today. We really appreciate it. And we're happy and honored to be here. Honored to sponsor the show when we can. I think we're going to continue trying to do that and promoting this wonderful effort. We've been so impressed with ARC's activities and efforts so far, and would like to do what we can to keep that rolling. Lynn, do you have anything to add?
I thought it was a great first outing. Nikos did a fabulous job, and I can't wait for more. I can't wait to be part of it as often as we can.
Thank you so much.
And so moving on to Dr. Peikoff's influence. I think my first experience with Dr. Peikoff was seeing him in 1990 at the Tamament Conference in Pennsylvania. So that was, 33 years ago. And if I'm not mistaken, at that conference, he was still working on OPAR. I think there was a celebration for him either having finished the first or the second part of it, or at least writing the draft of it. memories aren't sharp for exactly what part of what was done at that time, but he did have a wonderful set of lectures based on it.
Chapters
And
1 through 5.
1 through 5. And I recall little Kira Peikoff scooting along the floor there. She couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 herself tops, and Dr. Peikoff taking her out fishing there by the pond and the lake. And it's just a wonderful, benevolent, invigorating experience that week. But since then, of course, OPAR has been a very important part of my coming to understand objectivist philosophy. And perhaps later I'll touch on some of the other works and lectures and so forth, and experiences with him that have been an important part of my life, of Linda's life. I did offer earlier, before we came on air, to read a portion of a presentation that we made for Dr. Peikoff at the 2019 conference, I believe. I'm a big fan of trying to honor people and tell them how much they mean to us while they're available to hear it. It drives, I can't tell you how many times a celebrity or an artist, somebody who has passed, an actor, a singer, that has meant so much to so many people. And after they're gone, there's this great outpouring of appreciation for them, and they're not around to experience it. So I'm a fan of telling people what they've meant when they can. And fortunately, while Dr. Peikoff was not able to make it to that conference, we were able to get that award to him, and he was able to read and experience it. And then we were able to be in person with him at his home and make sure that he knew how much that he meant to us and why. So I'm going to jump right in and just read this. It shouldn't take more than just a couple of minutes, if you don't mind. But at any point you want to interrupt or raise your hand,
Yeah, I know I speak for the group when I say we would absolutely love to hear that. I was at that conference with the Quent Cordair Fine Art mini pop-up gallery. It was hardly even mini. It was an amazing setup, including live art being produced by John Wass, for example. An outstanding conference. So Quent, take as much time as you like. We would love to hear that.
Before you do that, let me say, since Kirk is right here, Kirk was the hero of that conference. If it wasn't for Kirk, we might not have been able to bring the art. He jumped in at the last minute and drove a ginormous truck of art cross country for us. So this is another opportunity for us to say thank you to Kirk Barbera.
Kirk is a man of both mind and muscle, and we use maybe more of his muscle at that conference than his mind, but thank you.
And I just have to say, I have such fond memories of watching John Wass do art and the amazing art gallery you guys had there. Every single day I was at the conference, I had to step in and spend time at the Cordair display there, because you had so much spectacular art there. I'm sorry, I couldn't help but make a comment myself. It was really one of the highlights for me of that.
We appreciated those conferences that we're able to attend and display at. It takes a tremendous amount of work, but it's always worth it to see the inspiration on particularly the younger folks' faces, and just being able to share with them what is possible and to make their conference experiences wonderful as it can be and inspirational as it could be. So thank you all, gentlemen. All right, anything more you want to add before I jump in?
I'm just going to say thank you. I have to get to the gallery. Let's get back to Leonard. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye, Linda.
Thank you, Linda.
Okay, just jumping right in, I'll skip the preliminaries, but the Self-Made American Award, again, this was 2019. The Self-Made American Award, presented by our gallery, Quent Cordair Fine Art, is awarded annually to an individual who has exhibited exemplary independence, self-responsibility, perseverance, and courage in working to achieve personal and professional ambitions, building a good life, a better life for himself, as left free to do under the protections provided by the US Constitution. The term self-made man usually denotes an individual who has pulled himself up by his bootstraps and made his way in life by his own hard work, having created his own material success and wealth. Indeed, the first two recipients of this reward are exemplary businessmen and entrepreneurs. But as a man is a being of self-made wealth and self-made soul, he is also, and even more importantly, a being of self-made mind. This year's recipient is a man of the mind. In her introduction to the Romantic Manifesto, Ayn Rand makes reference metaphorically to bridges, identifying Aquinas as an example as having bridged Aristotle in the Renaissance, and herself as a bridge between the aesthetic and cultural heights of the 19th century and anyone today willing to take up the cause of pursuing the ideal, the good, the rational, the right, the world as it could be and should be. We are deeply indebted to those long, high bridges that span the millennia and centuries, but there are critical bridges across the narrower gaps and chasms too, across the intervening decades and years, bridges that can be no less crucial for those attempting to make their way through a wilderness of irrationality. Our award tonight goes to a man who has provided a bridge, between Ayn Rand and the generations following, including a generation of which I am one. The man is an exceptional teacher, a splendid original thinker and communicator in his own right, and moreover, a stellar example of what an ambitious intellectual who is not Ayn Rand can be. What he can accomplish and achieve over a lifetime when he sets his mind to it. There's no doubt in my mind that Ayn Rand would be as proud of her student today as she was the day she wrote in her introduction to the ominous parallels, quote, "It is so wonderful to see a great, new, crucial achievement which is not mine," unquote. To which I will add, it is so wonderful to have seen in my lifetime a man who has built, sculpted, and shaped his mind and character in such a way that he has been able to accomplish all that he has in the way that he has. This evening, we recognize the man not only for what he's done and continues to do, but for providing the vision of what a man of the mind could be, should be, and is. We salute him for what he's made himself to be. In recognition and appreciation, the recipient of the 2019 QCFA Self-Made American Award is Dr. Leonard Peikoff. And that's about as good as I can do.
Outstanding.
You're an unbelievable. Well, anyone familiar with your work is aware. I mean, for example, idolatry is aware that you, sir, are capable of poetry of a philosophical nature, and that was another example of your beautiful capacity at prose poetry, sir.
Thank you.
Really moving and true.
Well, Dr. Peikoff has been a big part of my career and what we've been able to do with the gallery and even my own writing. And at some point later, if perhaps once after Kirk is able to speak a little bit and talk more about just how much, I mean, even with my writing, Dr. Peikoff's Principles of Grammar book was very influential in my approach to grammar and writing, and a remarkable accomplishment. And so anyway, I'll let you all continue, and perhaps Kirk would like to say
one question, if I may ask a question. You know, one of my very first memories of personally interacting with Dr. Peikoff was in his home. I believe this was late 1988. He was still working on Objectivism and Philosophy of Ayn Rand, and he was living in a nice neighborhood in Laguna Beach, Southern California. I walked into his home for the first time, and one of the things that struck me was the art.
Right.
unbelievable, the art. First of all, my jaw dropped. I had an I had to go from, he had to take me, in effect, from art piece to art piece so I could be overwhelmed by the emotional experience of it. Now, of course, he had a lot of Frank O'Connor. He had, he had Jose Manuel Capoletti there, but he also had this large nude male statue. He loves sculpture above all other forms of art. Sculpture is his thing. So we had amazing sculpture everywhere. I wonder if you could give us any, that was just a huge impression on me. And I always loved going to his home on Saturday nights just to see the amazing art collection, because there'd always be something that would inspire me there. What do you have any stories of interacting with him about his art, your art, or his ideas about art in general?
Well, we were able to get that. We had the honor of being able to enjoy that tour as well. And this was, I believe it was in late 2019. I think Linda had been to his home once or twice before that, but the two of us were there. We were able to the Self-Made American Award is, there's a self-made man sculpture that we have in the gallery, and we were able to present him with a personalized, the base was engraved edition of that, a casting of that sculpture. And we had the pleasure of him showing us around his entire collection. One of the things that immediately impressed me is that, should be a surprise to no one, is that his collection is highly, completely personalized to his taste and values and what he likes. And he doesn't go for the, oh, this is this classical artist that everybody's supposed to like, so I have one too. No. A lot of the work that he has is by relatively less known or unknown artists sometimes. So, but he has a great enthusiasm for it, and it's wonderful to share in that enthusiasm and watch someone have almost just a childlike joy of sharing all of the work that he likes so much. So.
Well,
I'm so glad that you brought up the theme of the self-made man. Leonard Peikoff, if you can track down a copy of the DVD in his own words, which really gets into the personal life of Leonard Peikoff and lets you see this self-made man and what that looks like in reality, not just kind of as an abstraction. He has great works, and you think of his stature, his character brings to mind some of the pieces on your website. Go to Cordair.com, folks, if you don't already know. Click on Bobby Carlyle right on the homepage, and you'll see what I'm talking about, but really across all of the art on the website. And so I really appreciate that, because as I put together my own top 10 list, I didn't quite know how to encapsulate the fact that, well, Dr. Peikoff himself is inspiring, but you've really brought that to us. And so thank you for that. Also, thank you out to Jeff Bannister, who is in with a super chat supporting the ARCUK. Thank you for that. He doesn't have a question, just a thank you. That's very generous. Also, Cyrano d'Anconia, always love that screen name. Cyrano d'Anconia says, I asked James earlier about his Peikoff review. Well, we're going to be getting into that as well. So folks, yeah, if you're not, and I'm sure you are, but if you're not already familiar with Quent Cordair Fine Art, just go to Cordair.com and you will be dazzled, you'll be inspired, you'll be amused. There's just things that are simply charming there, but also enormously inspiring. So Quent, thank you. And huge shout out to Linda as well. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
And you nailed it.
If anybody's interested in my writings, everything I've published is on Amazon. So just look up my name and check out the reviews and enjoy.
And I do highly recommend everyone check out your writing as well. Very inspirational material. And for those of us weary of the so-called fine art, which is non-representational or downright nihilistic or malevolent. Your gallery is just a breath of heroic and romantic fresh air.
Thank
I
you.
have to say, the sense of life, you will have a sense of life experience just looking at the art available at Cordair Gallery. As I highly recommend. And you nailed it with Dr. Peikoff. What a childlike sense of wonder that he always brings to it. You nailed it. He has a light sense of humor, and that if I were to try and characterize such an important intellectual with such a serious mind who's made so many profound contributions to philosophical pedagogy as such, the thing that people really need to understand is another side to him that is just light and joyous and childlike and playful and benevolent. Anyone who knows Leonard knows that really is his spiritual leitmotif.
Yeah, it's interesting that after he retired from philosophy, and when I say he retired from philosophy, I've got a list of just major accomplishments in philosophy. I've had folks tell me, well, Leonard Peikoff was great for bringing Ayn Rand to us. And yet you look at his accomplishments, excuse me, in both popular and academic philosophy, and no, he was a philosopher in his own right and in so many ways. So absolutely appreciate that. Well, at the same time, he gave us an example of what living your own life joyously and for its own sake looked like. Now, Quentin, I'm sure you have more to say, and we'd love to hear it, but I want to go to Kirk Barbera, because Kirk, I know you've got a lot to say, and we would love to hear what your thoughts are on Leonard Peikoff and on the theme of the impact of Leonard Peikoff on your life.
Yeah, so I like the symbolism and romanticism of my life in connection to Peikoff, because I don't have much of a real connection to him in person. I've seen him on stage a few times. I was once in a room at the Ayn Rand Institute when he was doing a special Q&A for the launching of the dim hypothesis. But even there, I didn't get a chance to like sit down with him or talk to him. Like I shook his hand briefly and that was it. So that's my interaction. But I don't know if you know who Henrik Schliemann is, and he has this he had this grand vision of history that he was had some interesting things about archaeology and the finding the locations that takes place in the book Iliad. And the reason I bring him up is that people have debunked him because he's so, in terms of his romanticism, right? Because they're so cynical these days. And but what I liked about it is how it drove him. It made him who he was. It pushed him to find things. And he found some evidence of what the real place of Troy was because of this romanticism. And, so for me, with Peikoff, he founded the Ayn Rand Institute in 1985, and that's when I was born. I was a kind of lost soul for a long time in high school. I was impressionable, but I was going this way and that. I didn't have any real guidance, and I found Ayn Rand. And of course, it's hard for me to explain the impact of Ayn Rand because she didn't have a direct impact on me in some sense. It was so mind-blowing and so epic that I just didn't grasp it until Peikoff. And Peikoff was the one who really grounded me in understanding what was really going on and what I was seeing. And because it's all just emotions at that time for me, right? And I was lucky enough to get him pretty early and her in my life. So that, putting it into words, all the things that they mean to me is hard. So the way that I formulated it in the one interaction I had with Peikoff, which I wrote him a little email, is I just said that Ayn Rand showed me how to live and you taught me how to think. And he just gave me a very, nice thank you in reply to that. So that I think is the impact that he's had, but there's lots of specific things he's done as well. So I grew up, I did like fantasy and sci-fi, but I never really expanded beyond that in reading. Ayn Rand got me into literature, but Peikoff really opened up the doors of something today that I don't think I cannot fathom life. I mean, I don't have kids, but when people talk about their kids, like I can't imagine life without them. That's how I feel about poetry. And I never read poetry, or I never liked poetry before that. It always made me feel stupid and inept, and something was wrong with me. Like, why am I not understanding this? But he gave me, in one lecture, it's an hour and a half, and I keep pushing this to people. It's poems I like and why. And I was, I think, 27, 28 years old at this point when I listened to this. And it just, reading all the poetry that I have now, which I've read a lot of poetry at this point, he doesn't choose what I think are the greatest poems of all time, but they are the perfect poems to introduce you to. It's real to poetry. And, someone who was always trying to get people influenced in poetry, I just, I can't help it. I always try to go for like the best of the best, but that's so hard to get to. And he does such a good job because he cares so much as a teacher, but he doesn't necessarily want you to, or he understands the process is required for you to get to that next level. And without him, I would not have started that journey into poetry, which I had been reading some plays before I did that. I was actually a film and theater major, but he really opened up theater for me as well. Ayan Chicolella, the artistic director of Austin Shakespeare here, and I have become good friends, and we've done a series of shows on ARCUK on 8th grade plays, which is another just fundamental opening of the doors of great art and great theater, and what it means and why it's unique and its power. So much of my life has been, widely guided by Ayn Rand, and specifically moved in the direction by Peikoff. I mean, just one other example is I worked at ARI for a short time after college, and we were launching this, this website basically that was going to put all these lectures online. And like with all tech things, there's always like, ABC iterations, and I was kind of on the first one. And so there were certain technical issues at the beginning, and I was doing this, some of the transcript for the education course, the philosophy of education. And, in my mind, I've never thought of being a teacher. In fact, I had very, middle class, I guess, conceptions of professors before I got it in the sense of, I thought, they're useless. They don't do anything. Right. And that was the view I got. And I never would have conceived of being a teacher or a professor, but I listened to this course, and I had to listen to it very carefully as I was helping with the transcript. But what kept happening was that, again, this is early iteration, so it would crash and the transcript would get all messed up. So I'd have to go and listen to it again and do it again. And then it kept happening. And I actually did it several times. So the philosophy of education, was a humongous transformative event for me, because one, I became a teacher for a little while after that. And I really formulated what I think are, because of his formulations, I should say I accepted his formulations of great education and what that takes. And I, like I said, taught at LaPorte for a couple of years, and it was very important part of my life. But so many of the even specific career moves, I now work at the Ayn Rand Institute, so it's kind of goes back to that symbolism and romanticism of getting, connecting and integrating my life through these different interactions, that all happened online, that all happened with lectures, that all happened with his books.
Oh, that's a great example. Philosophy of education is a great example of what Robert was saying earlier, how Dr. Peikoff took Ayn Rand's ideas and took it into a new area, and became in my view, he laid the foundations for a whole new approach to the philosophy of education, in my view. So it is a great example of Dr. Peikoff taking Ayn Rand's ideas and extending them creatively into a whole new field, pedagogy. And of course, no field suits him better. I myself have had some outstanding teachers in high school and university and law school. I had some really, really good teachers, but by far the best teacher, just from a purely pedagogical standpoint, has been, and I mean, head and shoulders. I mean, no insult against any of the other teachers who teach it, for example, at objectivist conferences. You know, whenever Greg Salvieri speaks, I know I'm going to learn something. Well, whenever Lisa Van Dam speaks, I know I'm going to cry and have my heart ripped out. I don't want to put them down. They're terrific speakers. They really are. But head and shoulders, Leonard Peikoff, as just qua teacher, is the best teacher. I mean, I'm going to use some very non-objectivist language here. He's the platonic form of teacher in my mind. Yeah, that's a great insight.
And we've got a couple more super chats. So thank you, Apollo Zeus, for 2 super chats. And on the second one, he has a question, which I'll read in just a moment. But Kirk, I totally have the survival value of great, though philosophically false art on my top 10 plus 1 list. And related to that is absolutely that that discussion by Leonard Peikoff of his favorite poems I like and why. Our producer has added a link to that to the chat. Anybody who hasn't heard that yet needs to click on it after we're done and give that one a listen. Outstanding. And speaking of poetry, and Quent Cordair and Quent Cordair Fine Art, the under the gift section at Cordair.com, you can find Quent's poem "No Sea Was Ever Sailed." This was brought up in discussion recently, so that is there for you to take a look. And the text is available for free, but the print of the photograph and the poem is beautiful. Should be on your wall. So the question from Apollo Zeus, off topic for Quent, favorite painting. That is off topic, but should be a quick one, right? Your favorite painting. So you put a couple pounds on it. So there's the question.
For a couple of pounds. So okay. So this kind of ties in with Dr. Peikoff's collection being very personal to him, and so I can do this on. Well, actually, that's one of mine. So you can look at that for a second. That's Molly's swing up there above me. But I'm going to take my favorite painting off of the wall and be back within 15 seconds and put it on.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, Molly's swing is both evocative and provocative. That one gives you, I think the kids call it frizzen, kind of goosebumps.
Right.
The ASMR folks will know what I'm talking about.
I probably have other favorites too. It's like choosing between your children and being asked to, is it?
Yeah,
so
it seems like it could be a problematic question for a man who runs the most beautiful art gallery in the world to ask him his favorite painting. I would imagine that that does change with time.
And we have 15 plus, I'm sure at least 20 excellent painters that we represent right now. So I could go through everyone and pick a favorite of all of those. But you mentioned John Loss earlier, having painted live for us at that conference. Well, my wife commissioned him to create this for me a couple of years ago. Now, this won't mean as much, I suppose, to the folks in our, let's see, that was Apollo who asked that. But this, for me, this is my current favorite painting, and it's by John, and it has the 2 parts of idolatry that have already been published. And so it's a painting of my fiction, and he likes to use the magnifying glass as a piece in his still lifes, and has good metaphorical associations with the magnifying glass.
That's a beauty. That is beautiful.
That's right. That hangs directly in front of me where I work. It keeps me motivated.
Yeah, I've seen
evokes my pride in what I've already done, and it reminds me that there's 3 more of those to be published yet. So that's my favorite right now.
I've seen John's still lifes in which he features books, and particularly Ayn Rand's books, and the way that he does pages and binding is really evocative. It really makes an impression. So that he did one specially for you is both enormously just and very exciting. That's beautiful to see.
Thank you, Apollo. I'm glancing down at the chat now. So thank you for that question.
And thanks to Jonathan Honig, who is in with a super chat as well. Thank you very much for that. I think Jonathan may be joining us here, hopefully fairly soon. But thank you for that super chat. Very much appreciated. Now, Kirk, you mentioned Leonard Peikoff's appreciation of poetry and how that helped draw you into poetry. I love the fact that we've got lectures like Poems I Like and Why, or The Survival Value of Great, though philosophically false art, because sometimes in objectivism, we really appreciate the ideas. Applying them in real life can be a challenge, and seeing that side of Leonard Peikoff, how important that, and in other discussions, other lectures that he's had, how important it is to bring the values in, to borrow a phrase, the facts and the values is part of what's inspiring to me about Dr. Peikoff.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, at this point, I think I'm very harsh about this, but I've met a lot of people who don't take any kinds of art seriously, not even movies, and I could never have them in my life. That's just something I just don't trust them as humans, like, that have a problem with people who don't take some kind of art seriously. I'll accept music, but if it's, depending on the quality of it or the type, but even there, like, I have a problem. Like, it needs to be a concretized version of some kind of human values that you can interact with to see, because you need to have models in your life, and you need that for your thinking. Even if the models aren't good, just that's what you need, is you have to have lots of those different experiences. And I think I got that. I don't know if Peikoff would agree with anything I'm saying right now, but I would just, I got that from him and from Ayn Rand in particular, just the necessity of art. It's not an option, and it's not a minor part of life. It is life.
I have a little saying that
I
goes.
can testify that Leonard Peikoff would agree to exactly what you said, because he said that to me in different forms, in different ways. I had a very similar experience with poetry than you did. When in school, they killed my love of poetry. I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
It's like they stomped on any idea that poetry was cool. And of course, being a teenage boy, in high school, it's like, oh, this is not boyish. Let me put it this way, not guy. This is woo is a little too woo and fuzzy, and anything can be poetry. And there came a point in my life, actually, where I came to appreciate poetry through some other people. And so one day when I was at Leonard Peikoff's home, I actually had the chutzpah to announce to him, Leonard, I think I have the objective definition of poetry. And what chutzpah to say that to a philosopher. And I got his attention all of a sudden, and he said, Jim, okay, let's hear your definition, and let's hear you defend your definition of poetry. And I shot it out for him, and I gave him examples of what I meant and what poetry meant. And I felt that I was sainted, I was knighted. I don't know what kind of title of nobility I could possibly be given. But when after a pause, he said, can I steal that? For my definition of poetry. I said, sure, anytime you like. And then a couple of years later, when he does the 75th anniversary edition of Anthem and he writes the introduction to it, he includes the definition of poetry that I offered. And I was just stunned, blown away.
That's
awesome. Talk about feeling knighted, but it was all about poetry. It really was. So I had a very similar experience, and it was this discussion that I had with Dr. Peikoff that helped refine my ideas and my appreciation of poetry. And it brought back to life an art that, public education had simply stomped out of my soul, but he helped me bring it to life in my own soul, for which I will always be deeply grateful.
I have a little saying that, am I on? I think I am.
Yeah.
A little saying that complements what Kirk was saying. He said, I trust nothing to those who hold nothing sacred. I know Robert's seen it before, but yeah, it's hard to give much importance or to hold in a high valuing way at all people who are too cynical to to give value to anything. And you see that in their response to art. We've said for a long time, we've been in business 27 years now, so we see this kind of thing a lot. But one of the best places to take somebody on a date is to an art museum or an art gallery, and just walk through and see how they respond to what. Not that they want not that you want them to like all the same things that you do, but the way that they respond to what they respond to is going to tell you a lot. And if they just glaze over and, you know, they're not looking at the art at all, and they start checking their phone and they're waiting for you to be done, yeah, I might tell you something about.
It's crazy that you say that, because when I actually had a conversation about art like that with Leonard Peikoff once, and he said essentially the same thing. I was talking to, it was before I, had met my wife of 26 years. I was sort of dating at the time. And one of the things, we were just talking about girls. One of the things you could just talk to Leonard about was girls. And one of the things he said is, one of the great things, he said the exact same thing. One of the great ways to filter out girls that you might be interested in or not interested in is share art.
Yeah,
Go look at art, go look at paintings or sculpture, listen to music. He said that stuff really is a major way for looking at what's important. Because it's not, in his view, Jim, find a girl that matches your sense of life. It's the details of philosophy. Yeah. No, sense of life is what I advise you to be checking out, life partner. And that was specifically one of the pieces of advice he gave me in terms of dating. It's crazy that you even say that in the connection of Leonard Peikoff. So thank you for that tickle too. You guys are really reminding me of some wonderful memories I've had with Dr. Peikoff. Really.
That's a great kind of filter. It's funny because Quent, you mentioned the way I've always put it is beware the man who holds nothing sacred. I've posted that on my social networks, and it turns out to be a great filter for the kind of people I don't really want. Anybody who would unfriend me over a statement like that, good. Absolutely. Now, I need to ask our producer. It looks like we do have Jonathan Honig on the line. Is he ready to go? Oh, it looks like we're going to wait 5 more minutes as he's getting out of a taxi cab. Outstanding. We've got a couple of, I've got to shout out. We've got some great super chats here that I've got to give props to Wes Stewart, another very generous super chat. Wes is always very generous when he chimes in, and we do appreciate that. No question. There's Shazbot, also with a very large super chat at $19.99, says, ooh, this might take just a moment. Might give us time for Jonathan to come on. If the 4 of you were stuck in the world of Fahrenheit 451, which books would you memorize, assuming that you could plan this together? I don't know. Do any of you have a must memorize? If I could memorize the whole of Opar and bring that into a world that doesn't have that book anymore, but I'm not sure if memorizing that would be realistic. Maybe Cyrano would be easier. James, do you have a thought on that?
Well, you stole mine. I mean, if the context is Fahrenheit 451 and we're asking ourselves, what book would I want to preserve for the future? Objectivism, the philosophy. Now, I know that's a tight call there between Atlas Shrugged and Opar.
But you got to pick one.
Atlas Shrugged is 1,000 pages. I know Opar is pretty technical and dense, but just in terms of, some of the passages in Ayn Rand's novels I've actually committed to memory. And it wasn't an intentional effort to try and memorize them. It's just that I've read them enough and they left such a deep groove into my subconscious that I can recite them back pretty much verbatim, passages from her novels. And so although 1,000 pages Atlas Shrugged would probably be easier than I think it would be, although any book, talk about ancient poetry, Kirk, back before the invention of writing, someone like Homer, they would memorize the entire epic poem, the Iliad, and it would be recited back. Memory did terrible, or writing did terrible things for human memory. But so conceivably, people could do this Fahrenheit 451 thing. And if there's a pleasure that would help me memorize, then obviously it would be one of Ayn Rand's novels. And of those, I know that there's a huge debate between Fountainhead lovers and Atlas Shrugged lovers, and I gotta say I'm torn sometimes between the two. So I'm not sure I can give a one book answer, but those would be the three I'd be tormented about choosing from. Let me put it that way.
I definitely want to hear Kirk and Quent's one book that they would save if civilization's falling apart. But it looks like we have Jonathan Honig on the line. Jonathan, can you hear us? And how are you doing this morning?
Oh, it's great to be all with you. I've been enjoying your show. Congratulations on 50 shows. And I'm especially enjoying today honoring Dr. Peikoff and sharing all of our experiences. And, you know, I studied philosophy in college, and, you know, good university. We studied with a gentleman by the name of Jürgen Habermas, who was a very well-known philosopher at the time. And I left so unhappy about the world, about my life. And then I discovered Ayn Rand, but also Dr. Peikoff. I mean, for me, he was the professor that I always really wished I had. And there's so much material by him that is so readily available on YouTube. Many of his lectures and his courses. I mean, he is such a dynamic lecturer, not to mention obviously an author. So avail yourself to not only Ayn Rand's work, obviously, but Dr. Peikoff's as well, because and James, I think I heard you and some of the other panelists mentioning this as well. I feel like I essentially learned objectivism from Dr. Peikoff. No, insult to Miss Rand, of course, but he was such a wonderful teacher of those ideas to me, even through his podcast, which is a treasure trove of just fun. So take this opportunity to learn from these gentlemen, learn from Robert and James and their discussion every week, and pick up and listen to some of Dr. Peikoff's work. I'll just say my all-time favorite is the 1976 lecture course, which is available probably for free, but it's, pennies on Ayn Rand Institute website. And you hear him explaining these ideas way back in 1976. And as I said, he's the professor you always wish you had. So pick him up and listen to him, and let's celebrate him here today.
Jonathan, I couldn't have said that better. The teacher we all wish we had, and in a way, he's the teacher we all finally got.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I said, it's the fact that so much of this material by Dr. Peikoff that people would once have to crowd into a little room to be able to hear, or send around tapes or records to hear it. It's readily available. And you've been touching on Dr. Peikoff's love of aesthetics, and I have to say, I've been to his home. I've been fortunate to be in his home and seen exactly the artwork that you're talking about. I mean, it's almost takes your breath away, the kind of the scale of it and the scope of it. But so much of Dr. Peikoff's work on the Great Plays series or things like that are parts of objectivism that I know I wasn't even so clear on. So in my experience, he not only builds on Miss Rand, of course, but he illuminated so much new things about objectivism that I'm still learning about. So take advantage of it and listen to what Dr. Peikoff has to say.
Have you had recent interactions, Mr. Honig, with Dr. Peikoff?
I from what I understand, he is very busy. We read about the Atlas Shrugged being sold to the Daily Wire, here's a guy I know that is always pursuing values, even at his age. You mentioned, I think Robert maybe mentioned that he, retired 10 or 15 years ago, but I know that he's been so busy pursuing artistic pursuits and all types of professional endeavors. And so, and obviously Miss Rand's influence continues to grow. So he's an inspiring guy, but I'll just say this, my all-time favorite of Dr. Peikoff's is the 1984 debate from Canada, which is a tour de force in debate. If you want to see how a debate is done, watch John Ridpath and Dr. Peikoff in this 1984. It's free on YouTube, and it's an unbelievable mic drop before you even knew the term. So watch. It's the socialists versus the capitalists, and Dr. Peikoff and John Ridpath absolutely. They burn the joint down in a good way.
A good way.
That's great to bring into the conversation. Incidentally, since you mentioned the the price of some of those you will remember, a lot of us will remember sitting around in a room listening to cassette tapes of these lectures. We kept waiting for the next one to come out. And since Quent mentioned it, the 1990 Tamament series, and then the year after that, when he finished the preliminaries of OPAR, where we all received a binder with the first draft because the book hadn't been released yet. It's great because if you go to the Ayn Rand Institute's e-store, you can download the MP3s of that first year and that second year, and it runs about $150. And yet, right on the website, it says you can have these for free. Just go to our e-course. And you're right, Jonathan, it's all available. It's all out there for the price of, well, it's not nothing because it's the price of your time and attention, but so worth it. Just a wealth of stuff out there.
I absolutely couldn't agree more. Take advantage of it and be inspired by it ultimately. And James and many of us have had the opportunity to meet him, but for me, it's his just contributions philosophically and all the work that he's produced. I always was inspired too by Dr. Peikoff, because imagine being Ayn Rand's student and think, how could anything I do compare to what she did? But Dr. Peikoff's work, dim, obviously Ominous Parallels, which has recently had kind of a TikTok resurgence. So these are just important works and a great benevolent man as well. So big hats off to Dr. Peikoff and to you gentlemen for celebrating him and inspiring us to read him every week.
Thank you for that, Jonathan. Now I've got to give one more thanks out too to Jay Sebastian, is in with a super chat, a generous one, and he says, Dr. Peikoff is the person who's made the second biggest impact on my life. The first being Ms. Rand. Her philosophy changed my life, and he helped me understand it better. Thank you, Dr. Peikoff. Thank you for that, Jace. Thank you for supporting the ARCUK. Very good of you to do that. And yeah, it's amazing I try to make a list. As I told you, I made a top 10, and I keep coming across, oh yeah, but this has got to make the list, and that has got to make the list. And content like understanding objectivism and objectivism through induction, and even the article Fact and Value, putting these ideas into practice. One of my favorite questions in personal development is, what does that look like? And Dr. Peikoff is so great at showing us, well, here's what this looks like if you take this philosophy and put it in practice.
And I'll throw out one more thing, and unfortunately I'm going to be listening, but check out his podcast. He did a decade plus of podcasts, quick, often extemporaneous perspectives, and where you see his great sense of life, his humor, his fun, his joy, and on all issues relating to the day during some really interesting times in American history. Robert has the book, of which features a lot of those. So just avail yourself of Dr. Peikoff, and thanks for supporting what we're doing here with the channel. Best premises, guys.
Thank you for your support, Jonathan.
Be well.
You've been a great friend and supporter for Ayn Rand Center UK, and we hope that wonderful relationship continues. I didn't kind of mean to put Jonathan Honig on the spot there, and I don't want to steal any thunder, but believe it or not, new content. All I will do is tease you like this. New content is still forthcoming.
Oh, really?
And the book, Keeping It Real, is really just the tip of the iceberg. I want to see my bookmarks flying out of it already. It's just the tip of the iceberg. The podcasts and the radio show that he did. He had a nationally syndicated radio show. And believe me, the stuff in this book is just the tip of the iceberg. Those podcasts and those broadcasts are filled with all kinds of amazing information. Thank you, Jonathan.
Outstanding.
You bring up Fact and Value, and I had the remarkable experience, one of the more remarkable experiences of my life. Okay, outside of reading Atlas Shrugged, the most important intellectual event in my life was attending by invitation seminars at Dr. Peikoff's home from the late 80s through the early 90s. When he was still working on Objectivism, the philosophy of Ayn Rand. I had been invited to participate in a seminar where we would read on Saturday nights. We'd meet at his home and give him feedback chapter by chapter on OPAR before it was published. And as we were going through it, as I say, outside of Atlas Shrugged, those Saturday nights discussing OPAR with him and our questions. I mean, I didn't know quite what I was doing there. There were Harry Binswanger would call in sometimes or be there sometimes. Philosophy PhDs and PhD students were there. And what the heck am I doing here? There's no, Jim, I want lots of different people with a variety of, ordinary people, not just philosophers, with a variety of backgrounds. But one night, as he's going to do a chapter of the book, he set it aside. We're not going to do that tonight. And he read Fact and Value, which he had just written that day. And he read it with passion, and he read it, with a certain degree of intensity. Let me put it this way. And when he was done, he opens it up to the group and he questions. The entire group sort of has this pause, they're sort of all taking their breath. And he says, does anyone have any questions? And timidly, with my first hand, I came up and I said, Dr. Peikoff, I've understood Ayn Rand's point that all values are based in fact, but you really make the point here that all facts are value laden. Really? Is the number of molecules on the dark side of the moon of Alpha Centauri somehow value related to my life? I'm not sure I get that logical connection. And that just stimulated, he just, boom, as if the whole issue that had brought up fact and value was tossed aside, and he calmed down and gave the most incredible tour de force discussion. I learned that day something very big. And that's the kind of experience you could have, and you'd have with Dr. Peikoff. You'd go there, you'd just ask a simple, honest question. I don't get this. And it would just be Dr. Peikoff and you and reality. And until he knew you were satisfied, he was not done. What's unclear now, Jim? Are you sure? And you got that part here. And he took me through the entire argument so that now it's like, using one of his phrases, it's truck-like to me. If someone were to say, is there some value neutral fact? I would just laugh. I would then launch into a conferentized discussion inspired by Dr. Peikoff. But that's just one moment of the kind of priceless gifts that he constantly gave me in terms of expanding my mind and clarifying my understanding of objectivism.
Yeah, there are value neutral facts, and they are the ones that put you to sleep. Even if it's just your intellectual curiosity and helps you weave a greater web of the things in your life, if it has any interest in your life, it has to have some value. Andrew Bernstein often says it's either for me or against me. And I absolutely appreciate that. We got a super chat from Linda Cordair. $10 says, we value all the speakers on this stage and the work being done by the Ayn Rand Center UK. Thank you, gentlemen. Well, thank you very much for that super chat. And then Shazbot brings us back to the previous discussion before Jonathan came in, because we didn't get answers from Kirk and Quent yet, but he says, practically speaking, maybe the three of you could each take one part of Atlas Shrugged, and then the last could memorize the whole part. Kirk, if you were going to bring a book, Kirk Barbera, if you were going to bring a book through the collapse of Western civilization is to bring back society, do you have a thought on a book that you would want to memorize in order to bring back?
Well, since it sounds like the rest of you will be taking on Atlas Shrugged and Opar, I'll say the Iliad. Yeah, something to kind of make sure we have a foundation, and it'd be good to have the beginning and with the Iliad, and then I don't want to say the end, but the pinnacle of since we're in Fahrenheit 451 world with Atlas Shrugged. Because one thing I would worry about having even Atlas Shrugged, if you have the complete collapse of everything, is that the context maybe isn't there for people in the future. So it'd be nice to have something that goes back thousands of years and gives some of the really simplistic, in a sense, foundations of Western civilization that we can then build on with these, pillars. So that'd be my answer.
What a fascinating example that is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at the very dawn of European literature.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I always say the Iliad, when I teach this to people, is it's kind of like Achilles Shrugged. Like
feel
there's a
you,
very
Sean.
famous moment in that, and so it's nice to see this beginning. And then like Atlas Shrugged obviously is the epic of that. It's the pinnacle of that tradition, the Western tradition, that if you read a lot of the literary canon, the Western literary canon is there.
Should we read it in archaic Greek or should we read it in translation?
Oh,
Yeah,
come
that's
on.
the question,
Memorize
right? I would say I think read it in translation, unless we're going to really preserve the language for the future. Like,
Right.
so that's the question.
But you
Yeah,
know
that's a
something,
good question.
But you know something, my wife and I just recently in the last couple of months went through listening to the audio version of Lattimore's translation of the Iliad, and we just loved it. Hearing something that was originally meant to be heard, and poetry, as Dr. Peikoff stresses, should be said out loud.
Loud, yeah.
Really can't appreciate a poem unless you are, even if you're alone in a room. I articulate out loud the poetry, because that's how you get the poetic juice out of something, is to actually get the sound and the meaning connected. So yeah, something like the Lattimore translation of the Iliad, literally my wife and I just went through it, and it was a wonderful experience.
That's
Yeah.
Latimer, Latimer.
Latt, 2 T's.
Lattimore.
Lattimore. He has one of the most famous translations of Homer's Iliad.
All right,
That's
outstanding. And Quent, did you have a book you wanted to add to our list of books to save?
My number. So I'll take a third of Opar with if you two don't. I'll or a quarter of it. That would be my number one as well.
Excellent.
My second one would be the one I'm writing now, and that's my idolatry story, which I'm breaking up into 5 parts. For me, that's my most important artistic work in the world, and I think hopefully it'll be important going forward, but that remains to be revealed. So I'm working on it.
I've got to say, those of us who have enjoyed the first 2 are heartened to know that you're working on the next one. So thank you for that. I've got to jump real quick because Nicholas Krusek, one of our more recent hosts on the ARCUK, who is presenting at the top of the next hour in a show I'm very much looking forward to, is on the line. Nicholas, are you with us, and how are you doing today?
Good to see you. I'm here. Thanks for having me.
Outstanding. And thank you for joining us, because we want to know, we're talking about the impact of Leonard Peikoff on all of our lives, and the discussion has ranged very widely, but do you have a thought that you want to give us on, well, what has been the impact of Leonard Peikoff on your life, or on your development, on your career in general?
Well, I've really enjoyed going through all of Leonard Peikoff's lecture series in the past couple of years. I've learned so much from all of them, but there's a few in particular that have influenced me the most, and they've been the ones on aesthetics, the ones on literature. So I just joined in a few minutes ago, so I know you were talking a little bit about literature before I came on, but certainly for me, the 8 great plays was an absolutely huge influence. I took a lot of English courses when I was an undergraduate. This was a couple of decades ago. I was fortunate enough to have teachers who were still of the older generation, who were actually interested in communicating the value of literature rather than deconstructing everything and making a big postmodern mess out of literature. But nonetheless, when I first listened to the 8 Great Plays series, it was a real revelation. I'd read some of the plays before. I'd read Antigone, Othello, I'd read Cyrano and Don Carlos. Some of the other plays, I'd heard of the playwrights, but I hadn't heard of Le Cid. I hadn't heard of Monavano, although I was familiar with some of Maeterlinck's other works. So that was an absolute revelation. But above all, his approach, taking a philosophical approach to literature, beginning by identifying the plot theme, then showing how the plot theme is expressed through the development of the plot, through the characterization, and then at the end giving a summary of the philosophical ideas expressed in each play. That was something that was completely new to me. I would have to say, if I had to choose one of the discussions of the 8 great plays as my favorite, it would probably be the discussion of Schiller's Don Carlos. I'd read all of Schiller's plays, decades ago when I first encountered Rand, when I first read the Romantic Manifesto. That became my reading list. I set out to read everything by Schiller, everything by Hugo, everything by Dostoevsky. So I knew Schiller's plays and I really loved them. I knew he had a lot of interesting ideas about freedom versus tyranny, and especially that he influenced a lot of composers, which sort of ties in with my background. Verdi in particular set several of Schiller's plays as operas. And the discussion of Schiller's Don Carlos, it just tuned me into so many aspects of his characterization. It brought out so many subtleties in the Grand Inquisitor scene, the scenes between Carlos and his father, King Philip. Actually, after listening to that discussion, I was inspired to go to teach a course on Schiller, which I taught for last year for Simon Fraser University here in Vancouver. So I did a course called Schiller at the Opera, where I took several of Schiller's plays and I showed how they'd been adapted by Rossini, Verdi, Tchaikovsky, and other composers. And I tried as much as possible to incorporate some elements of Peikoff's approach, beginning with the plot theme, showing how the play develops through the drama, through the depiction of the various characters, and then showing how composers use music to bring out certain elements of the story, certain elements of the characterization. So the whole 8th grade play series was hugely influential on me for that reason as well. If I had to cite one other series of Dr. Peikoff's that had a huge influence on me, it would be The Value of a Great Though Philosophically False Art. That's a question that's been very much on my mind over the years. What value can we get through art that has maybe a religious inspiration or an inspiration that communicates ideas that we don't agree with, whether it's, well, even Victor Hugo. Victor Hugo was religious. He was probably a socialist, or at least claimed to be, to say nothing of Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, who had very strong Russian Orthodox, very strong sort of utopian socialist background. In my case, I do a lot of work and a lot of research on Richard Wagner, very, very controversial composer for a number of reasons, because of his political views, his racial views, his philosophical views. And I'm actually working on a talk right now on that subject, where I have to communicate what is the value of this particular individual's work, in spite of all the bad ideas and in spite of the negative influence that he had on the culture. So for me, the discussion of the value of great though philosophically false art, it helped to clarify a lot of my own views on the subject, how we can get intellectual value and emotional value from a particular literary work, or a particular painting or sculpture, or a particular musical work, even though it has ideas that we disagree with, even though it may have a sense of life that we disagree with, it can still introduce us to a world of human experience that can enrich our lives nonetheless. So those are some of my preliminary thoughts on how Dr. Peikoff's lectures and courses have influenced me.
Outstanding. And a couple of these we brought up before, but I'm glad that you mentioned both 8 great plays and the survival value of great though philosophically false art. If anybody has missed out on either one of those talks, and neither of them are super long, and they're just powerful stuff. So it's great to hear that that's had an impact on your career, on the courses that you've chosen to develop. That's really outstanding. I've got to give a quick shout out. Mary in the chat is in with a $50 super chat, very generous. And again, all the super chats today, great gratitude to everybody, because this all supports the work that we do, that everybody does on the Ayn Rand Center UK. Mary, thank you for that. And she says in her comment, Anthem was where I started my love of philosophy at age 10. And then she says, so I would memorize Anthem. Of course, we're still talking about which books would you memorize if we were bringing books forward for the Fahrenheit 451 scenario or the collapse of Western civilization. Outstanding. And our producer has put in a question in the super chat. How did Leonard Peikoff influence your life? By all means, feel free to bring those into the chat. Nicholas, thank you for that. Again, the aesthetic, the art, the poetry, the ways in which Leonard Peikoff goes above and beyond academic philosophy and shows us, well, okay, but what does that look like? And what can you bring in? What can we bring into our own lives to enrich our lives in a way above and beyond the ordinary? Because Objectivism is, nothing if not a philosophy for living an extraordinary life. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, I want to hear I now want to hear your course on Schiller's influence on music. We're all aware of the Beethoven connection. I mean, most people are aware of the Beethoven connection, but all the other stuff you were talking about is relatively unknown, and it would be utterly fascinating because Schiller is filled with such really majestic themes in his own work. Boy, if there's some way we can bring that to a wider audience, do let us know, Nicholas, because that sounds fascinating.
Yeah, I seem to recall that Dr. Peikoff actually mentions Verdi's opera of Don Carlos in the lecture on the play. I think he speaks fairly highly of it. And in fact, a lot of Schiller scholars, like Charles Passage, the famous English language translator of Schiller, actually argues that Verdi in some ways made the drama a little bit more taut, a little bit more purposeful, because Schiller's Don Carlos, it's a marvelous play. I've read it many times, but it's a very long play, and it's a play with a lot of minor characters, a lot of subplots, and there are certain passages that meander a little bit. And Verdi just cuts a lot of that away, just focuses on the essence. His treatment of the Grand Inquisitor scene just blows my mind every time I hear it. And as well as the final scene where he throws in a kind of an interesting twist on the play. So yeah, what composers have done and what musicians have done with the play is really extraordinary. And so getting back to Dr. Peikoff, one of the things that really blows my mind is,
just
here
quickly,
we have, oh, sorry.
I believe Quent wants to jump in, so I just want to
Oh, no, that's okay. Let Nicholas finish his thought, and then I'll just add a little something afterwards. Thank you, though, Dan.
Yeah, I was just going to say how rare it is today to have a first-rate philosopher, a first-rate philosophical mind who has such a vast knowledge of the arts, of literature. I understand that Dr. Peikoff knows a lot about painting, a lot about sculpture, and actually music as well. I know that he goes to operas, he goes to symphony concerts. He did that talk on operetta, which was about a year or two ago, which has introduced that particular art form to so many of us. So just the sheer versatility is something that I think we can all be inspired by and try to emulate.
Glad you mentioned that, because that Viennese operetta talk from 2021 is available, and it is just great fun to have Dr. Peikoff come out of retirement just long enough to give us that tasty slice there. Quent Cordair, what were you going to say?
Well, just something Nicholas said about Dr. Peikoff's approach to literature and to drama, and showing philosophical roots and foundations of what he was talking. It just reminded me very much of having read, again, I'll bring it up just because it's what I'm going back through. I had listened to the Principles of Grammar lectures, I believe, so many years ago, and back to the binders and the little printout, that's the way we originally had that, as James is shaking his head. So, and Dr. Michael Berliner finally got it into print. But anyone who writes anything, I recommend Dr. Peikoff's Principles of Grammar. But there's an introduction, and it's not just grammar. So in the same way that Dr. Peikoff took his approach to drama and literature, just 2 sentences from the introduction. This is quoting Dr. Peikoff. I'd like you to be able to see not only the principles of grammar, but why those principles are as they are, what the roots of those principles are in the nature of the human mind and of human knowledge. Ideally, at the end, you should be able to see every grammatical rule, directly or indirectly, as a consequence or expression of some essential requirement of the human mind. Has anyone else ever approached?
Anyone ever else? No, that is.
And it makes, if you have a conceptual, ideological approach to most of what you're trying to learn or study, this approach to grammar. And when did he have time to do this? I don't know. But
a wonderful course. That grammar course is so amazing. I mean, his discussion of subordination and coordination just blows my mind, and it's improved my own writing so much. I remember in one of the lectures, he says, if you write a sentence and something doesn't seem right, it just doesn't quite come across the way you want it, probably it's a problem having to do with subordination. And sure enough, I've come across that again and again in my own writing. Frankly, I don't know how I'd be able to survive Keith Lockett's writing course if I hadn't listened to Dr. Peikoff's series on grammar first.
Yeah. And the follow-up, back when I was first taking on tape, the tape Leonard Peikoff courses, I took grammar and logic, and they were such a powerful introduction to the subject that, and so much more powerful than anything I got in my formal education. Sure, you learn the basic rules of grammar and stuff. Dr. Peikoff connects the rules, as Quent points out, he connects them to the Ayn Rand's theory of concepts, to epistemology generally. And so now you understand the power of it, why it's there, why it's a feature of all language. And then the climax to those courses was objective communication. Here, I guess I was just happily took it in the right order: grammar, logic, communication. And now I'm ready to take, if someone wants to take grammar to the next step and learn how to communicate in a persuasive, effective way, I've got to urge you you really can't miss the objective communication course either. It is filled with powerful, and talk about something that had a huge impact on me. I was a trial lawyer for 18 years, and in terms of giving closing arguments, in terms of organizing just a persuasive talk, something like that, had a huge impact on me professionally as an attorney, in terms of just how I wrote my closing arguments to be powerful and persuasive. His objective communication course, and that he gave just shortly before the Understanding Objectivism course in 1983, which was, by then I was living in New York City. Kirk made me feel so old when he said he was born in 1985. I was at the Peikoff Understanding Objectivism course live in New York City in 1983, taking it at the Roosevelt Hotel way back then. And that was the first Peikoff course I ever took. And I don't think that a single course had a greater impact on me as a human being than that course. I had drunk so much of the Kool-Aid of the critics of objectivism, to be honest, that, I had in my head, well, this is some kind of crazy cult, and she's dismissed, and, okay, she maybe says some interesting things here and there, and okay, so my initial enthusiasm, they had poured buckets of ice water. No, I still love the Fountainhead, I still love Atlas Shrugged, I'm still going to study this thing, but geez, if Ayn Rand is telling me what music I can like, or if Ayn Rand is being all moralistic in the ways these people are saying, I'm not sure. I take Understanding Objectivism, boom. My questions were all just, and Dr. Peikoff, which is one after another, knocked out of court all of the absurd arguments that people have been making, that I had heard, mind you, from some of these harsh critics themselves. I don't want to name their names. They're some rotten people out there. I had reached out and studied from them. It completely corrected my understanding of what Ayn Rand was all about in profound ways, So, yeah, Dr. Peikoff's courses, logic, grammar. We earlier had Jonathan say the philosophy of objectivism itself in '76. Now, that has been supplanted by Opar. He regards the organization in his book version of that to be much superior, but it also was a revelation to me. But all of Dr. Leonard Peikoff's courses, and that's it. We would sit around in someone's living room. We would sit around and listen to taped courses on philosophy. And, I'd tell my friends, so what are you doing on Thursday night? Oh, well, I'm taking this taped course on epistemology. My friends would say, so you pay money for no college credit to sit in someone's living room for 2 hours and listen to a highly technical philosophy lecture? Yes, I'm afraid I do. And it was enjoyable. It was enlightening. It was, again, one of the most electric experiences of my life. Dr. Peikoff's courses, as I say, cannot be matched simply in terms of his pedagogical skill. What I owe him is impossible to put into words.
I wanted to mention the history of philosophy lectures. Are those still free on?
Yes, they are.
Yes, they
Yeah,
are.
Right campus.
that
Well,
That's
as far up to Kant, not the ones after Kant, but
That's
the ones-
true. That's
yeah.
true. And we happen to be doing, I'm going to get a plug in here if I can, on Sundays, if you are a paid subscriber to Ayn Rand Center UK, and it is only available to paid subscribers, on Sundays, we do a discussion group, a seminar on Dr. Peikoff's courses. We've handled objectivism through induction, induction in physics and philosophy. We've covered, we are right now doing the history of philosophy courses, and we've relatively, still time to get in early on the discussion. And if you subscribe, you can listen to the old discussions that we've had on this. But we're doing the history of philosophy right now, and we just covered Plato's metaphysics. So if you want to get in sort of early in the history of Western philosophy, there's still time. This Sunday, we'll continue our discussion of Plato.
Yeah, and that history of philosophy course is now available, and the link is right from the Ayn Rand Institute. It's all official as a playlist, and it does run through. And for the longest time, these weren't available. It runs all the way through the end and past the Kant discussions. Yeah, for a long time, that second set, you could find the early ancient philosophy, but the new ones are now available too, and they're all on YouTube. And again, it's great because the Ayn Rand Institute says you can buy them, you can buy these MP3s, but we've put them all out there too. So what the kids have access to now versus what we had 10, 20, 30 years ago is kind of mind-blowing, kind of hard to believe, but it is all out there. And yeah, it's interesting when they released Ayn Rand's Art of Fiction discussions and then the Art of Nonfiction, and it was easy to think, well, I'm not a writer, so I don't necessarily need to hear those. But it's just like with Leonard Peikoff's courses, Objectivism through Induction and the Art of Thinking and Objective Communication. And even if you're not that interested in technical philosophy, these courses simply make you a better thinker. They simply make you a clearer thinker. It's amazing because they're obviously deeply philosophical, and it frustrates me when people suggest, well, Leonard Peikoff wasn't an original philosopher. He was just a student of Ayn Rand. You listen to courses like The Art of Thinking, and you think, no, this is an original philosopher. And for all that he is an objectivist, he wouldn't have thought what he did without Ayn Rand. This is original work. It's really extraordinary what's out there now.
As a historian, I have to say that The Dim Hypothesis is probably the single most important book ever written in the field of historiography, in the theory of history. Talk about creative and powerful work that if there is a civilization of the future, I am certain it's going to be a vital part of learning how to study and understand human history. It had a revolutionary impact on me. Again, it was I was able to have firsthand conversations with Dr. Peikoff in his living room about the subject of history, and he was an endless fountain of wisdom on this, and he does go well beyond Ayn Rand, although again, as far as I'm able to judge, it seems to me Ayn Rand would be very proud indeed of their new and creative developments in this, but they are extensions of Ayn Rand's own thinking in this in ways I suspect she would have been very, very proud of. Although he's very modest in terms of saying, no, Dim is absolutely not objectivism. See, in Opar, he said, when he was doing it, and even as he was writing it, he would tell us, nothing, not a semicolon is going in this book unless I am certain Ayn Rand would have endorsed it. 99.90% of the cases, if I remembered that exact formulation from Ayn. And in those cases where maybe I didn't hear the exact formulation, I am so certain that Ayn Rand would agree with this. I can hear her saying it in my own head. So although there are aspects of objectivism, and even Dr. Peikoff says Opar is strictly speaking not endorsed by Ayn Rand, so bear that in mind. But on the other hand, he was very keen on making sure that it was faithful to what he knew Ayn Rand believed, whereas Dim, he's taking it to a whole new level in the field of historiography. And as a historian, I am in deep appreciation. I don't know that I could have done my work as a historian or continue to do my work as a historian were it not for the methodological inspiration and discussions I had with him on this very topic. So I urge people to go check out the dim hypothesis if you're interested in theories of history. He knocks out all the other previous theories by implication with such power, and he focuses on the power of ideas. Obviously an idea he got from Ayn Rand, but he develops it and applies epistemology to history in such a way it's breathtaking. It's absolutely breathtaking. Highly recommend.
Since you mentioned that, I'm going to take a moment, because the reason why we're having these great people joining us talking about the impact of Leonard Peikoff on their lives, and thank you, Quent, thank you, Nicholas, of course, thank yous go out to Kirk and to Jonathan as well, is that this is the 50th episode. The 50th episode in this series, Keeping It Real, in which we've been discussing Leonard Peikoff's answers to real-life questions taken from his podcast. And James, you in the context of your comments there, our producer has sent me a list of the top 10 of those 50 episodes, the most watched episodes. Number 6 on the list, the limitless vistas of a closed system. Well, it's in the air again, the question of, is objectivism the philosophy of Ayn Rand? Or is it a school of thought wide open to development? And Leonard Peikoff has been admirably exact in that regard of saying, well, here's what you should regard as Ayn Rand's philosophy, specifically her words and the works that she authorized as part of her philosophy in her lifetime. Here is what are my book on objectivism, which, as far as I know, and given all of the content that came from discussions with Ayn Rand, is consistent with objectivism, but use your own firsthand judgment in making that decision. And then with Dim and other works, here are my ideas, my extensions. This is Leonard Peikoff speaking. And I love that he was so good about that. That made the number 6 on our list of the most viewed episodes. The most viewed episode, How Does One Lead an Atheist Life in a Mystical Society? And James, you know, this wasn't just a discussion between James Valliant and me about this. This was a discussion of Leonard Peikoff's answers in the book, Keeping It Real. Objectivism's Friends and Foes, well, you know, a little clickbaity there, but then the number 3, Ayn Rand's Personal Courage. And so we have a great mix of topics. Thank you to everybody who has made this series so successful. This grew out of the previous series, Leonard Peikoff's essays, and that included his lectures as well. And James, you know, the most popular video in that, and it's even blown away the ones in this series, over 1,000 views and the most engagement. You would think, well, clickbait? Is it some modern current events talking about Trump and Biden? No, it was the analytic-synthetic dichotomy. That first essay of Leonard Peikoff's included in the Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, what I have said was one of the most influential writings ever for me, because it's the one that answered the final questions I had in philosophy, and the point at which I would say I was an objectivist. Going back to 1990, Quent Cordair mentioned Talament and that conference in which I also, just like Quent, met Leonard Peikoff for the first time. So very exciting to see the numbers that Daniel has given us. Again, some of the more controversial episodes were well viewed, but also some of the most academic. And it's heartening to know the people listening to the Ayn Rand Center UK, the people who are discovering objectivism for the first times in their lives, are not just about, and it's important to be engaged with current events, but they're not just about controversial current events, but they are taking ideas seriously. And I hope that we are helping, I know we are because of some of the comments in the chat, that we are helping people to keep it real.
You know, I think that speaks well of our audience. I think that speaks well of all of you. And at the Ayn Rand Center UK, what we're doing is we're developing a worldwide audience of young students of objectivism. And I know we're reaching new people, and I know we're reaching young people, and we're reaching them in a substantive way. And we're reaching them in a way that opens a discussion that is really vital if we want these ideas to have an impact on our culture. So if you do, I mean, in the course of doing all of this stuff, based on we've covered just about every single essay and lecture given by Dr. Leonard Peikoff at this point. And as I say, the podcasts and the radio broadcasts still have all manner of material that we can still go through. But just going through his important books and lecture courses and essays has been a tremendously educational experience for me. Now, I had read some of this material more than once already, but going through it again, going back to the question we got to me at the very beginning, I would have to say that it was things like spiraling back, if I can use an objectivist epistemology term, the spiral theory knowledge, spiraling back on things like the analytic synthetic dichotomy has been the most informative part of, if you ever want to really learn something, try and teach it, try and explain it, even to a lay audience, because then you'll really have to know, hey, what was exactly unclear with me, and what connection did I not make there that I should have? And in doing that, to answer the initial questioner, that's been the stuff that has actually had the biggest impact and have been my favorite stuff in doing. And as I say, I think it speaks very well to our audience that the analytic synthetic dichotomy discussion is the #1 in our Leonard Peikoff series here at ARCUK. But please do consider becoming a supporter, a subscriber. We are doing important work here, and we are creating a worldwide community of young students of objectivism. And I can think of no more important work going on in the world today, frankly.
Now, James, I've got to give a shout out. Jeff Bannister is in once again to the super chat. One of the great things about this episode was Shazbot suggested that we, in a Fahrenheit 451 kind of world, what books would you memorize? Jeff says, someone memorized the ominous parallels. So we will know what happened to cause the burning of books. And then he says, great show, thanking Dr. Peikoff, gentlemen. Thank you for that, Jeff. And I certainly agree that the ominous parallels and the updated version of that as well. Yeah, that needs to be brought forth exactly for those reasons. And James, you and I had a great discussion about that book, because not only does it explain the rise of Hitler's Germany, but it also explains and discusses, and in great penetrating detail, because we did a whole show on this, the rise of the United States and the founding of this country, and what has happened to it since then. Look for that episode, The Spirit of the 60s, in the essay series. So that was very good as well. Now, you mentioned we've talked about a lot of Leonard Peikoff's works, but I would hesitate to say all of them, because there's a whole almost genre of Leonard Peikoff lectures out there that I heartily recommend, even though they're a little more on the edge. In some cases, Leonard Peikoff has said, this is not my field, and he talks about it anyway. Again, I love this objectivism in the real world. So, and they're available for free now. Courses like Judging Feeling and Not Being Moralistic, How to Be Emotional in Making Choices but Not Emotionalist, How to Be Judgmental but Not Improperly Condemnatory. Very, very practical and sometimes controversial courses that he gave. I think maybe the most controversial one was the Love, Sex, and Romance weekend that he shared with Helen Kenner was there at the time, Amy Peikoff was there at the time. And they're all available online. Now, James, I did my own personal Leonard Peikoff's Impact, top 10 plus 1. So I've got 11 items. I'm not even going to mention them now. We've gone awful long. I know Nicholas has a great show that he's going to be doing at the top of the hour, and Ask Me Anything on music. So I think maybe I'll do a whole episode, maybe of Life on Earth next week. Tomorrow, Amy Nasir and I are interviewing Gene Maroney, so we can't do it then. That's going to be a great episode as well.
That is.
Quent Cordair, Nicholas Krusek, and shout out to Jonathan and Kirk as well. Thank you for being with us. 50 episodes of Keeping It Real, and we couldn't think of a better way to celebrate that and to give something back to all the listeners as well than to bring you all on as special guests. Thank you for your thoughts, your reminiscences, your discussion of Dr. Peikoff. This has been a great time for me. I've been making notes because there's so many sort of springboards for me in this episode from your thoughts and my own as well. I know that everybody got as much out of this discussion as I did.
Thank you so much for having us, Robert, James. Really appreciate it.
Thank you guys very much.
Pleasure and an honor. Thank you. And thank you to Dr. Peikoff.
And Quent, I've just got to shout out to you and Linda again. Thank you for that recent sponsorship. 99.9% of our audience knows to go to cordair.com whenever you need inspiration. But if anybody hasn't been there, you know what to do, cordair.com. And Nicholas, we're looking forward to your show coming up. Nicholas Krusek knows more about music than you'll ever forget, to steal a line. And I am looking forward to that show.
Thank you.
Me too. Me too.
It's going to be good. Thank you, everybody. We're back again next week with Keeping It Real, but this has been a special episode on the Ayn Rand Center, UK. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening.
Be well.